got a ton of information to go over this week for your football fantasy. But first, as always, let's talk about what's going on with Sports Fluent, the podcast. So coming up later tonight is episode 48. We're going to go through the week in the NFL, week 8, the good, the bad, and the ugly, as we do every week. We're going to talk about the NBA and the issues with their start dates being December and January, what it means for players, what it means for the NBA financially, and what it means to the salary cap, because there's some parts of that as well. We're also going to preview our first series of the GOAT Chronicles. So as you may have heard, we're going to start a series of 6 to 7 part kind of mini series debating who's the GOAT. The first series will cover Jordan versus LeBron. And the first article is going to be released tonight on sportsfluent.com, and it goes through the competition. So our Analytics MD has written a 2-piece article about the competition and the eras. So comparing Jordan's era versus LeBron's era as we try to go through the series of who the real GOAT is. Plus, we're going deeper, and we're going to tell you why some of these players, other than Jordan and LeBron, why they're not the GOAT. So we'll go through Wilt, Russell, Kobe, and others and tell you why they're not in this GOAT conversation. On top of that, we have Sports Fluent Conspiracy. That's going to be released later on this week. And our first conspiracy is Michael Jordan's first retirement and what really happened for that year and a half that Michael Jordan went to play baseball. And then in our weekly feature, The Fix, we're going to go through the Los Angeles Clippers and how we can fix them. And I'll give you a hint, 2 big things. We're going to blow them up and we're going to move them. But that's on the Sports Fluent podcast being released later on tonight. So let's get to fantasy football because that's what you're here for. So we're going to kick it off like we always do with our starts and sits at the QB position. And then we're going to go through some of your questions. We're also going to talk about waiver wire, so who you should be looking at this week to pick up if you haven't already. And as per your request, the mid-season MVPs in fantasy. So we'll get to that in a minute. So let's start, like I said, with the QBs, the starts and sits. So this week, the first start is someone who came out of the gate great. He's in the MVP conversation for fantasy for the first half of the week, but he's had a couple of rough weeks. This week, he's got a matchup against the Seattle Seahawks where he should be able to get back on track because that defense is still a little suspect, even with all some of the moves that they've made. So look for Josh Allen to have a nice week this week against Seattle. The other one, and listen, I know how he became the starter was a little suspect. You know, a doctor making a mistake and really ruining possibly Tyrod Taylor's career. But Justin Herbert is the real deal. We talked about him as a sleeper. We talked about him as a streamer. But he's legit. And he's a start this week versus Las Vegas. To the sits. So this one is kind of a combination of the way this game is going to play out. And I've been right so far, right? I've been kind of 2 for 2 when it comes to the Tampa Bay, New Orleans, NFC South. What's gonna happen? I told you the Saints would win that week 1 matchup, and then I told you Brady and the Bucs were probably going to take the division. So far, it's looking like that's going to happen, especially with Brady's new weapons. But this week against Tampa, in Tampa, their defense is looking pretty good, and I'm sitting Drew Brees if I have to. The next one is, and this one might be a sit for a couple of reasons, but obviously the matchup is terrible against the Baltimore Ravens, and I'm sitting Phillip Rivers. I think it's going to be a lower scoring game for the Colts this week, and I don't think they're going to be able to kind of do too much against that Ravens defense. So I'm sitting Phillip Rivers this week. Our sleeper, wow, he came out of nowhere last week. So keep an eye on, because he's got a really good matchup against that Atlanta defense, Drew Lock. So if you maybe Matthew Stafford is your quarterback, and obviously because the COVID, he's probably going to be out this week, and you need someone, take a look at Drew Lock of the Denver Broncos, who in fantasy anyways might be a nice play this week against Atlanta. I'm going to add in another one. So I typically just do sleepers. I'm going to add in watch out. And I say watch out, and there could be a million reasons why, but this one is an interesting one for me. Ben Roethlisberger, although the matchup looks good, I find that they're going to run the ball more than probably you're going to expect, right? Look for the running game out of Pittsburgh to have a big week. I think they're going to have a big lead. So Roethlisberger's not going to need to throw a lot. So just watch out for Ben Roethlisberger this week. To our first question. It's a good one. What do we do with the Cowboys offense? Yeah. So, like many of you, I have Ezekiel Elliott as my running back. I was expecting big things. It was looking promising. Dak goes down. Dalton goes down. Ben DiNucci, for all my Italian friends, doesn't do great. And now they're going to be starting Gilbert or Rush this week. We still actually don't even know, which allows the defense, obviously, to put an extra man or two in the box, which limits what you can do with Ezekiel Elliott. So to the question, what do we do with the Cowboys offense, is you pray. You put in Zeke because you can't sit him, and you hope that they figure something out with that offensive line and they figure out a way to get some offense going. As far as the receivers go, that's another question. If you have the ability to sit, if CeeDee Lamb is your flex, or Gallup is your flex, and maybe CeeDee Lamb is your wide receiver too, let's look to the waiver wire, guys. It's going to be a tough sledding as long as these guys are their choice of quarterback. They obviously didn't make a move at the trade deadline. A lot of people are saying try to pick up Fitzpatrick as an example, but they didn't do anything. And so the Cowboys offense is going to be a difficult one to play. Like I said, with the exception of Ezekiel Elliott, I think he gets back on it if he's healthy. So there's also he was questionable this week. He didn't practice, but that might have been more about rest. Hold on. Does the Stafford sit? We got a live question, so we'll just stop and answer it. Does the Stafford sit affect Swift? Will he get more short passes because of the backup? Okay. So it does. It affects Swift on a positive and negative. So it's kind of a net zero because, again, they'll be able to throw an extra man in the box, which will limit Detroit's running game. However, to your point, as a safety valve, look for, right, be it the tight ends or the running backs, to get a little bit more action this week in the passing game. So especially if you're in a PPR league, right? So Swift's still a play, but I think he makes up for whatever he loses in yardage rushing with receptions and receiving yards. So definitely Swift's a play. To our running backs. So our starts this week, Damian Harris, the Patriots against the New York Jets. It's a good matchup. When healthy, because he's been kind of in and out of the lineup a little bit, when healthy, Harris looks really good. And the Patriots will need to run if they're going to expect to win this game and stay even remotely close to having an opportunity at a wild card, which I don't think they do. But they probably think they do, and Harris is going to need to have a big game for that to happen this week. So Harris is a good start against the Jets. The next one is depending on what happens with some injuries. So in Seattle, Carson obviously is hurt. Hyde might also be out. So this is a big if, right? If Carson and Hyde are out, DJ Dallas looks legit. So if those two guys are out, I'm starting DJ Dallas for the Seahawks this week against Buffalo. I'm sitting Ronald Jones. And it's not because he's not talented or he hasn't been great so far this year, but I'm sitting him because Fournette's healthy. And now it's become more of a committee backfield. Plus, Gronkowski's coming in to his own, like we mentioned last week. Antonio Brown is expected to suit up this week, probably get about 15 to 25 plays in. And his roomie, Tom Brady, if you don't know, Antonio Brown is living with Tom Brady. So there's clearly a connection there. There's, hopefully there's some chemistry as well if you're an Antonio Brown or a Tom Brady owner in fantasy. But there's so many mouths to feed that once you add in another wide receiver, a tight end that Brady's familiar with, and a healthy Fournette, I don't think there's an opportunity this week against New Orleans for Ronald Jones to really have a big week because there's so many other options, not just in Tampa Bay, but other players that you can put in that'll probably do better than Jones this week. The next one, and this one's, hey, when I'm wrong, I'm wrong. And last week, I had Le'Veon Bell, revenge game against the Jets, start Le'Veon Bell. That was a bad call. It was a bad call. And it's a shame, too, because if he's not going to get right against the Jets, then I don't think you could start Le'Veon Bell until you see something out of him in that offense. So Hillier's still the man there, which is good. So if you got him, play him. But Le'Veon Bell this week against Carolina is a sit. However, I would, if you have him, especially if he's a handcuff to Hillier, right, keep him, because if he gets hurt, obviously then Le'Veon Bell's role changes, and that will change his fantasy value. To our sleeper, this one's a deep sleeper. Tyler Ervin at San Francisco. So Green Bay's got some issues at running back this week. Aaron Jones is hurt, so if he doesn't play, it's 50-50 if he's going to play, Jamal Williams, and A.J. Dillon both have COVID, so they're not playing this week. And so now you're going deep into your practice squad for the Green Bay Packers. So if you're absolutely desperate at running back, he's the one that I think will get the most fantasy value against a tough San Francisco defense this week. So that's if you've got no other choice. Watch out for Jonathan Taylor. And it's a shame because he's been having a great season, good fantasy season. However, you should also watch the injury report because he tweaked his ankle. So that might limit his playing time. And the way that Hines and Wilkins looked in week 8, right, they're probably not going to push. They're not going to push him. So again, it might turn into a bit of a committee back. Or a committee backfield, excuse me. So just be wary of that, especially depending on where he is health-wise. But just pay close attention to that. So watch out on that one this week. Which actually takes us, it just answered the question, because the second question was Jonathan Taylor. Are you worried about Wilkins and Hines and how they've played? Yes, I'm worried because of that tweaked ankle and the injury. With rookies, they don't want to push them. They don't want to give them too many carries normally if they're not the workhorse. So watch out for that play. Yes, I am worried. But again, let's see how it plays out. So we'll jump to the next one. Curtis Samuel. So this is another question. Curtis Samuel or Hardman. I'll go Hardman on this, and only because when you look at these, the wide receivers, you want to look at kind of their offense, right? Who's their quarterback? And Hardman's going to he has the more upside, right? In the Kansas City offense, it looks like he's leapfrogged, I think Robinson, in the depth chart. So if I have to pick between the two of them, I'm hoping it's a flex. I'm going Hardman over Samuel. Which takes us right into our wide receiver starts. First one, I've been high on him. I told you guys from pre-draft. I'm a fan. So Deontay Johnson, it looks like him and Ben Roethlisberger have a nice chemistry at Dallas this week. So there's going to be a lot of scoring to go around. Although I know, like I said, they're going to probably be up and they're going to run the ball. So it's that's why I said watch out for Ben Roethlisberger. But they're going to score early, and I think Deontay Johnson is going to be the one that takes advantage of that the most. The next one is one, and this one is half what I'm seeing, half what I'm hoping for, because Justin Jefferson is one of my wide receivers, so I want him to have a big game, but I also think he's set up after kind of a dud to kind of bounce back this week against the Lions. So Justin Jefferson start this week. And then our sits. And this, again, a lot of this stuff has to do with who's throwing, when it's to the wide receivers, who's throwing them the ball as much as it has to do with the defense and the matchup. I'm not a fan of Tua right now in terms of fantasy value throwing the ball. So I'm sitting Devontae Parker against the Cardinals. And then back to the Dallas Cowboys questions, I'm sitting CeeDee Lamb against the Steelers. It's a bad matchup anyways against the Steelers defense. Even more so when you don't even know who your quarterback's going to be, or even if you did know between their options, they're not great. They're not good. They're actually pretty ugly, those options. So I'm staying away from pretty much all of the Dallas Cowboys offense this week. Sleeper, I don't know if it's a sleeper so much as you got to put him in, right? You got to take a chance on Antonio Brown. You got to play him, don't you? I would, but watch out for him. I think if he is as healthy as they say he is, we heard reports that out of all the wide receivers in Tampa Bay, he's the one that's in the best shape, which I don't doubt. Right? Everything about Antonio Brown that we've ever heard has been he works hard, he practices hard, he takes care of himself. We don't know about his mental state all the time, but in terms of him on the field, right? He's the best receiver. Typically, he's whether it be fantasy or real, he's just come out and he's just the best receiver. As long as his head's in the game, he's one of the best to ever do it. So I don't know if that's really a sleeper against the Saints, but he's definitely worth putting in if you have him. The one I would watch out for is DJ Chark. We don't know what we're going to get out of Jake Loughton, the starting quarterback this week against the Texans, right? So you watch out for that one because, again, quarterbacks affect these wide receivers more than maybe their defense in some cases. So just watch that matchup and be careful there. Trade question. So I like this one. These types of trade questions are always tough. So the question is, I have Higgins and Slayton. I'd like to trade them off as a pair for an RB1 or, individually as, maybe for an RB2. Here's the thing with trades. And this is why it's so hard to make trades, I think, both in reality and in fantasy. Everyone overvalues their own players. Whether you drafted them or you picked them up on waivers, you're always overvaluing your own guys. And when you make a trade offer for someone who you're asking for, they're overvaluing them as well. So that's what makes it difficult. Someone always feels like they got the short end of the stick. So when we're looking at T. Higgins and Darius Slayton, right? Well, let's look at what's their value. Well, they're flex plays, right? They're matchup dependent flex plays. So are you going to get an RB1 or an RB2 out of someone? Not if they know what they're doing. Right? You could always try, I guess, but you don't want to insult the people that you're playing fantasy with by, you're asking, T. Higgins and Slayton for Alvin Kamara, right? It's just not going to happen. But for a flex, yeah, maybe package them both together if you're, but it also depends on something else. So this is something for all trades, not just this one. When you're talking trades, you have to look at one, obviously what your needs are. So obviously if you have these two wide receivers and you're looking for a running back, clearly you have a need at running back. Great. The person that you offer these guys to needs to have a need at wide receiver, right? If they've got if they're a heavy wide receiver, they're not going to make you a deal because they don't need two more wide receivers or another wide receiver. So look for the team that matches up. Look for someone that's, maybe depleted at wide receiver. Maybe they had like Michael Thomas and some others who got hurt. Maybe they drafted poorly. They're stuck with AJ Green or something. Look for those guys that need a wide receiver or two, but then maybe are heavy at like if they've got 3, 4, if they're starting their two solid running backs and a running back at flex, yeah, maybe they could look to make a move like that. So just be aware of who you're trading with and what you're asking for, right? And try not to, I know it's hard, try not to overvalue your own players. All right, so to tight ends. So our questions about tight ends, and we're going to talk about our starts and sits at tight end. So our start this week our first start is TJ Hawkinson at the Vikings. And so he's got a good matchup. And again, this is one of those ones where Matthew Stafford, right, is going to look to, back to that Swift question, is out due to COVID. So again, who's the safe bet for backup quarterbacks, for young quarterbacks? It's typically their tight ends and their running backs if they're receiving backs. So look for the tight ends and the running backs in Detroit to have some opportunities. That's why I'm starting Hawkinson. And then my next one is one that kind of started off really strong, got injured, and dropped off a little bit, and looks like he's starting to come back again. Drew Lock, as I said, is a sleeper, and his tight end, Noah Fant, has a good matchup against the Falcons. They've given up 21 plus points 21 plus points to tight ends three times this year. So it's a good matchup. And for a young quarterback like Locke, again, it's nice to have a tight end like that. So I'm starting Fant this week. To my sits, I know I might be beating a dead horse, right? But Dalton Schultz of the Dallas Cowboys, I'm sitting. Maybe it's too easy to say that. Maybe you already knew that. But again, not knowing if it's Gilbert or Rush at QB against the Steelers defense, it's bad all around. So I'm sitting Schultz. This one is interesting because he was a start for a couple of weeks, and now we're sitting Trey Burton again this week versus the Ravens. One, because he's playing the Ravens, which is a tough matchup. Two, he's still sharing time with Jack Doyle and Ali Cox. So again, he's not going to get as many opportunities as we'd like to see. And there's some other options out there. So I'm sitting Trey Burton. Sleeper. So this one is mostly because of the way that they've, started to use him since OJ Howard got hurt and with Chris Godwin out. Sleeper, so Rob Gronkowski might be one that you might want to sneak into your lineup. And the one to watch out for, actually in the same game as one of our starts, is Hayden Hurst. So Atlanta's obviously playing Denver this week, and Denver's only given up 10 plus points to tight ends twice. Only twice this year. So Hayden Hurst is a risky play, so watch out for that one. And our question, obviously, as I mentioned, is about tight ends as well. And this is a good one because with the injury to Kittle, right, Jordan Reed's going to have an opportunity. And the question is Reed or Ebron. And this is why this one's tough, because Reed has the more upside in that offense. And I would, if I knew that they were healthy, I pick Reed, and I don't even think about it over Ebron in the way Pittsburgh's using him. However, Reed gets hurt, right? He's injury prone. So can you rely on him? Like, would I drop Ebron, right, for Reed? I probably don't have Ebron on my team, but if I did, I'd be worried about his ability to stay healthy. If he's healthy and playing, Reed's the start. Reed's the one you pick over Ebron. Which takes us actually to our waiver wires. So and we're going to talk about Reed again here in a minute. But let's go through our waiver wire. So again, if you need, let's say Matthew Stafford. If Matthew Stafford was your quarterback, or you have a quarterback on bye, Kirk Cousins is a nice play this week against Detroit. You might want to look at that. And these are all guys that all the guys on this waiver wire list are people who are available in over 50% of NFL.com leagues. So Kirk Cousins, DJ, if he's available, right? If you have savvy players in your league, they might have scooped him up already. But DJ Dallas, like I said, with the injuries and possible Carson and Hyde both sitting, DJ Dallas is a nice pickup this week. Not a great matchup against Buffalo, but still will do well for you. Gus Edwards. So I know that Dobbins is probably is already rostered in a lot of leagues, but Gus Edwards, when Mark Ingram is out, Edwards does get a nice, some nice goal line carries. He can, he's a little bit touchdown dependent, but I like Gus Edwards if you have a need at running back. Wide receiver, couple for you. Marvin Jones, that took a knock now that Stafford's out, so be cautious on that one. Alan Lazard is set to come back, so that's a nice one in Green Bay. Again, with no running backs, right? They're going to throw the ball more. Those, the Devontae Adams obviously already great, but he's going to get a bump. Lazard's going to get a bump. Tanya's going to get a bump. All those guys get a little bit of a bump. All those wide receivers, because I'm not really sure who's going to run the ball. If you need a tight end, this is back to that Reed thing, right? I'd take a chance at Ross Dwelle. He's the one, right? If Reed goes down, I hate to say this, right? But it's just historically, this is what happens is, he gets hurt. And so Dwelle is the one who's going to be the beneficiary at tight end. So look for that one if you're kind of sneaky waiver wire pick. Defenses, we don't talk about them too much. Arizona's got a good matchup this week. So look for, if you're streaming defenses at the Cardinals, and Gonzalez versus Miami as well, if you need a kicker. All right, so that's it for waiver wires, our starts, our sits, kind of our top 5 questions that we got this week. And so to kind of end it off, before we say goodnight and let you get back to stressing out about the election, um, we were asked to give our MVPs, kind of mid-season MVPs at each position for fantasy this year. And one of the caveats was, don't pick the obvious, right? Like Patrick Mahomes at quarterback. He's, obviously he was picked really early, and he's getting the most points. So yeah, that's an easy one. We're not doing that. We're looking at guys that were MVPs based on where they are currently in terms of their stats versus where they went in the draft. So kind of value MVP, if you will. So the first one, so our quarterback, you didn't pick him early, right? He went in 8th, 9th, 10th round, and yet he's the 4th top scoring QB in the league, right? That's a steal. That's my MVP. Tom Brady. Tom Brady is your midseason MVP at the quarterback position. For running back, I'm going to give you 2. And the first one, I think, because he was a backup, so he went later than he probably would have, right? Because of an injury, he became kind of the workhorse, and he's really done well. He is 5th or 6th, depending on if you're standard or PPR scoring from all running backs, and he kind of flip flops position, whether it's PPR or standard or half PPR, with this other person who I said and what that he was done. That you can be he's not going to do anything this year. Just trade him off, use his name to get something great. Midseason MVP, it's a draw. Kareem Hunt, Todd Gurley. For the value of where they were getting drafted this year, right, to be top 5, 6 in scoring is especially with so many in most drafts, right, running back heavy drafts as most are, these 2 guys were steals, and they are way outperforming what their projections were, again, being in the top 5 in scoring this year. The wide receiver, and it's a good thing it's a mid-season one, because his stock is plummeting, and now with an injury, he probably won't be the season fantasy MVP. But, Julio Jones went early, Calvin Ridley went later, but he's your midseason MVP. He's either 2nd or 3rd, whether again depending on your scoring format, and went much later, obviously, than anyone to get this value. Right, he was not going in the 1st or 2nd round. So Calvin Ridley, and then at tight end, right? He's 5th, I believe, in PPR, 3rd in standard scoring, and that is Green Bay tight end Robert Tonyan is your tight end mid-season MVP. So we had a couple of more questions come in, so let me just pull those up. Let me know what you guys think about our mid-season MVPs. What about Giants? The Giants D against Washington. I'd actually be more inclined to take Washington's D against the Giants if you can get them. Yeah, I think it's probably going to be a low-scoring game. There's going to be a couple turnovers. So yeah, I'm okay with that. I think there's a couple of better options out there. As I mentioned, I like Arizona better than that matchup, but I actually like I said, the flip of that, the Washington over the Washington D instead of the Giants D. All right, so that's it for this week. Remember to check out the GOAT Chronicles, sportsfluent.com. That's coming out later tonight. For Sports Fluent podcast, the full episode will be released later on tonight. And the Jordan Conspiracy dropping next week. Again, you can find out all those dates on sportsfluent.com or follow us on Instagram and Twitter at sports_fluent. Until next week, guys.